Welcome everyone to our, it's a January live stream, and that is because we are going to be looking at the messages and cases that we were sent in January during this live stream, as well as sharing some other news and having a general discussion, hopefully with the people that have turned up live, and just keeping it nice and interactive and easygoing. That's the idea. I'm joined today, as always, by Hamid, who's with me here.
Hi, everyone. It's been a while, but we're back and looking forward to join and have a great moment with you guys. So let's kick off.
Yeah. So I don't know if we've got any general announcements, Jaime, about this year. It's a whole new year. It's a whole new start.
Well, yeah, I think it's been like, 6 months since the last time?
I think
so we've been busy.
Yeah,
it's been a while. So we've been busy, and at some point, there's a nice announcement that we are going to be attending events again. At some point, we did realize that after the rebranding and coming out with ForestPack 9, Forest Ivy, RailClone 7, we spent so many time focusing on internal stuff that after pandemic, that somehow we stopped going to events. So big news is that we are going to be on the road again, starting by the end of March. We'll be attending Soda Sorrento, the new event by Matteo and Fabio, and afterwards we are planning to attend pretty much everything happening in Europe. So I can assure that we will be in 3Ds London by April. We will be, I think it's in June, we will be in Utrecht for the UVW, as well as for the World Visualization Festival. And on top of that, we're in contact with more people. And the goal is to, get in touch with you guys again and meet personally and exchange beers and comments and news about this ongoing and revolutionary industry.
Yeah.
So that's a big announcement.
Industry.
There's also, and Paul will give you more news about that. There's also minor versions of our plugins going out. But Paul has more news on that.
Yeah, in the next week or so, right?
Yeah.
So if you're at the events this year, do stop us and say hello. We'll be wearing ITOOSOFT t-shirts, of course, but it'd be nice to talk to people in real life. So we've got a few people to say hello to on the chat. We've got people coming in from Brazil and California so far. So if you're coming in from
cool.
it's pretty cool. Far-flung part of the globe, please let us know where you're coming from. Apart from that, I'm just going to make a start immediately. I've actually got quite a list of things that to get through from this month. A lot of interesting questions, but I probably won't get through them all. And Jaime, you'll probably stop me at some point when I've bored everyone too much.
Of course.
So I'm going to start with a few just quick ones on sort of what's new in a couple of releases of ForestPack and RailClone that are coming up quite soon. These are, just to say, sort of minor releases with some features added based on requests that we've had over the last couple of months. So they're these kind of incremental changes based on feedback from you guys about what you need for your day-to-day real work. So the first one I'm going to look at in ForestPack is the ability to use collisions in all distribution modes, not just in the map-based distribution mode. And here's an example. Perhaps you've used ForestPack to distribute a load of vehicles along a spline, and they're radically different sizes. We've got lorries and we've got cars and things like that, and clearly they're all overlapping in ways that are not helpful. And here, as you can see, we're in path-based distribution mode, somewhere where you wouldn't have been able to use collisions in the past. But now if you scroll to the bottom here, you can see we've got the little collisions box there, and I can just turn that on now.
Paul,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think you're not sharing the screen.
No, I am. You're just seeing me a little bit delayed. You can hear me delayed.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's
sorry about
You're
that.
about 10 seconds out.
We haven't done this in a while.
Yeah. I will at some point definitely forget to share the screen, but on this occasion I haven't. So you can see there's the collision thing. I've enabled that, and then if I turn on preview on viewport, I should be able to see, there we go. Now we've cleared all the colliding objects from along that spline. So this is just one use, but you can see this now works with splines. It also works in the other modes, so the reference mode and particle flow mode also now support using collisions. So that's a small change, but hopefully useful. We've got some messages there. Like, have we got any other people dialing in from anywhere? I've got Hamid here. Yeah, Asaad's here. That's great. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So first up, we've got, this is a little bit more technical for people that like effects, which is probably a minority of people. So let me just load up this file quickly here. So I'm just going to bring in another file. I'm just going to hide the screen from you while I do this. Okie dokie. So, as always, we've got this effect system in ForestPack. And what it lets you do is to add new features using fairly simple-ish expressions. And oftentimes we get requests for things that we can add to these so that you can add additional features where necessary. And one of the things we added recently was a new expression called sub ID. And what it does basically is it allows you to access the individual IDs or individual objects in groups. So for example, here is a group here which has got 5 types of plant pot in it and 5 types of plant in the top of it. And here I've got the group exploded so you can see the individual parts. And so what we can do with this new expression is we can randomize the pots and the plants separately and then scatter them in a group or in a scatter, sorry. So it's a quick way of getting loads of variation without having to say add, or in this case 5 times, that would be 20. If I wanted all these different combinations, that would mean 25 objects I had to create. Whereas here I can just create one group with each of the variations in it. And the way to do this would be, first of all, to create the group, you want to group them in a way that is somewhat logical. So when you create the group, just select the different portions each time. So I would, for example, select the plant pots and then select the plants and then create a group. And the order that I've selected them creates the kind of index inside the group. So I know that selecting the 5 plant pots first, there are IDs 1 to 5 or 0 to 4 probably. And then the plants themselves are 5 to 9. So I've already done that here, and this is already in the ForestPack object. So what we can do then is come into the effects rollout. And I'm not going to make you watch me type this out. I've already got the effect here, but I will show you it and explain it a little bit maybe. So what we've got here is a simple effect really, and the new bit is this bit here. Ooh, just crossed it over. Is this bit here, which is the geometry sub ID. Okay, so that is the index of those plants in that group. And what that means is that I can say, hey, look, I'm going to toggle the visibility. This is the first part. So you can see here, I'm controlling the visibility, and I'm saying if the geometry sub ID of the plant is equal to this random number from 0 to 4. So I'm randomly picking one of the plant pots using this part. If it's equal to this random number 1 to 4, then I'm going to set the value to 1, which means it's visible. If it's not, I'm going to make it invisible. And if, in effect, what I'm doing is hiding everything except that plant. This little section here with the 2 pipes, this means OR. So I'm saying if the plant pots, which is random ID 0 to 4, if one of those is selected, make it visible, otherwise hide them. Or if geometry sub ID is between 5 and 9, these are the plants, and I randomly pick one of those, make that visible, otherwise hide them. And without going into that too much, that's pretty much what it does. And if I enable it, you can see in my viewport here, currently the groups are showing all of the plants and all the plant pots. If I turn it on, now you can see what I've got is tons of variation. Each time I've only got 1 plant pot and 1 plant, and I've done all that just using this effect here. And we'll probably include an effect like this in the library of effects so that you don't have to think about programming that for yourself, and make them stackable so you can stack them up. But this just shows you what our adding this new attribute makes possible, which is much easier combination, or combinatorics really, combination of objects within groups, scattering and randomizing inside a group. Also works by allowing you to access the sub IDs of the ForestPack selection object, or forest sets I should say, as well as the LOD objects. Okay, so that's a new thing. And another one which I haven't got a demo file for is just this thing called pmats. So we've mentioned it a few times in our release notes, and it's a file format that we're starting to use for our libraries called pmat. And we had an email asking what they actually are. What is a pmat file format? And essentially what this is a way for us to save material libraries in a way that is not linked to a particular 3ds Max version. So which means that ForestPack can load material libraries from sort of Max 2012 to 2026, and you can create a material library in 2026 and it'll open in 2012 or 13 or whatever. It goes either way. So it serializes the materials into our own format, basically, which is quite handy. This works, it's mainly for our benefit so that we can distribute libraries more easily, but if you're in a studio or you work with users on other with other older versions of Max, you might find it convenient. And you'll see this new option when you go to your library browser. If you're saving an object from the scene and you go to file format, here you can change it to I2 portable. And this is a new thing. And now you'll see that we've got two new formats here. So you can see that the material library is now saving in pmat format, and the ForestPack object, the geometry, is saving in FP format. So both of these things are not linked to a particular version of Max and will open in older versions, provided you've got ForestPack installed, of course. So I just thought I'd mention that because we'd had a few questions about it. Okay. So on to RailClone. What's new there? Let's have a look at a few things. First of all, one of the things we got asked for is a new incline spline operator. And this was so that you could create kind of slopes and inclines on splines without having to actually change the spline itself, just doing it parametrically. So let me just pop that open on this screen. Okay. So here I've got, it looks like a boardwalk at the moment, and you can see I've got the spline going along the bottom there. Now, normally if I wanted to turn this into a staircase, I'd have to grab the spline and I'd have to lift up one end of it to get the slope of the staircase. And that can be tricky when staircases go around corners, because you've kind of got to match the same angle as you go around the corners and things like that. But what we can do now is to use a new spline operator, just set the angle parametrically like so. You can see the spline is still flat, and the slope is created inside RailClone, which is quite handy. And you can, of course, keep building this staircase just by now changing this spline. And it doesn't mean I've got to worry about this all will go wrong. It doesn't mean I've got to worry about creating the incline manually and trying to match those angles, which is pretty handy. So that's cool. We've also got a new isolate mode in the RailClone editor. So we had some questions about people who wanted to just quickly, who work on more complex styles, who wanted to quickly be able to see the outcome of just one generator. So maybe I had 5 generators here, and you just want to quickly see the outcome of one generator without having to turn off the other 4. What you can do now is right click on any generator and go to isolate, and you can see it highlights in red the generator that's currently active and turns off all of the others. So we can just quickly now isolate generators. So you can see exactly what each generator is doing, which is quite a handy little extra feature. We've also got box mapping added to the UVW XForm node. Let me just open a file to illustrate that. This there's a caveat that comes with this feature, I have to say, and it's not going to work anyway. So let's see. Let's turn on my materials. Okay, it's not going to let me show the UV checker. This is Max for you, isn't it? Unpredictable. So here's an example. So I've got 2 objects you can use to create this wall, and what we can see is that the texture is repeating each time. Now, this goes around corners as well, so the normal kind of triplanar mapping might not work here because it will kind of smear it where it curves and that kind of thing. So The old way of doing that would have been to come into the segments themselves and coming in to apply box mapping, which you can see here, which lets you generate box mapping directly inside RailClone. But if you had, say, 50 different objects here, you'd have to go and do that for every single one of them, which is super tedious. And then if you wanted to make a change, you'd have to go and change all 50, or you'd have to wire, you'd have to wire numeric parameters to all 50 UVW channels, which is a little bit tedious. So what you can do now instead is we can add a UVW XForm modifier after that. This has always been here, this XForm modifier, but it's got a new tab called mapping, which has the box mapping or some of the box mapping options that we can turn on here. And you can now map all of the segments that run through it. So now you can see I'm mapping those. And the mapping obviously runs across segments, so it doesn't stop and start with every new segment, it runs across them. So that's quite handy. Time saver. The only caveat is this one disables instancing in V-Ray. It only works with instancing in V-Ray anyway. These ones, if you're using V-Ray, using them from here, enables you to maintain instancing. So there is that caveat. Okay, it's just a technical limitation to do with how things work under the hood. And if you do super high resolution models and you need instancing, then stick with doing it in the segments. But if it's just easy geometry like this, walls, anything simple, then this might save you a whole bunch of time. Okay. We've also got a new change, which is to do with the fact that the RailClone Spline modifier, which allows you to add markers and things like that, is now compatible with the new Spline Ops modifiers in RailClone. So this is an example where we've used markers to add windows and things to this wall, for example. And formerly, if you had used the new Spline Ops operators, which are all down here in RailClone, all of these, then say, for example, the new incline one, then we'd have lost the marker information, because what was happening internally was RailClone was regenerating a new spline, ditching the old spline, using it to create a new one, and that's changed now. And one of the biggest uses I see for this is the offset modifier. So now what we can do with the offset modifier, as well as all the others, is you can see I can offset that spline, but I've kept my marker data. So as the spline offsets, my windows and doors are still there. And this is really useful if you're using splines in multiple ways. So you're using a spline, for example, you're using it to create the walls, but then you are using it again, but it's a slightly different offset to create the sunshades or something on the outside that matches window boxes, something like that. It lets you reuse the splines with different sizes. And this works with all of these different spline nodes in RailClone, which is cool. Of course, if you substantially use these to change the structure of the spline, like if I start adding additional sort of loops and things like that, or if I get rid of the corners or something like that in some way, manipulating them inside of RailClone, then my marker data might change in ways that are unpredictable. But for the most part, I think this is going to really make things a lot easier for people. And I think that comes to the end of what is supposedly a minor update, but I think there's some really useful little features in there that will really help people with day-to-day stuff, which is our whole goal. So we've got a few questions by the looks of it. Is that right, Hamid?
Yep. So there is one coming from Hamid. Will this mapping work with like UVW unwrapping? I mean, follow the geometry.
It's more like it's not. It's more like it's box mapping effectively. So it's box map. It's not UVW wrapping in the sense that it doesn't flatten the geometry. It's just box mapping in that it projects it on the X, Y, and the Z axis. So in that way, it's more like triplanar mapping. But the difference with doing it in RailClone is that obviously with most box mapping or triplanar mapping is that it projects on the X, Y, Z axis of the world. Whereas in RailClone, if you've got a curved spline, the mapping, imagine the box is also curving around the spline. So it will project it to follow the curvature of the spline. And that's where I would use the mapping in RailClone instead. Also true, of course, if your objects aren't, following the XYZ axis of the world. They're just positioned differently. So
Okay.
so that can
There's
really
another
be
question. Can you randomize animation start frames of tie cache objects or Alembic?
I'm assuming that's a ForestPack question. It's a good question. ForestPacks, I'd have to test it to be 100% sure. But if it's a geometry which is animated inside of 3ds Max and you can see it in the viewports, then effectively what ForestPack does is samples the geometry at each frame. So if that's sampleable, then yes, that should work. In RailClone, we don't have animation. It's not really meant for that, so it's meant for more of a modeling tool. So there's no ability to randomize animation. But in ForestPack, it should be feasible. I'd have to test it to give you a 100% yes. Unless you tell me it doesn't work, in which case we can add that as a possible, something we can look at for the future.
And then there's a bug that Asaad's reporting says if you open any image into this Max and then create RailClone style and open the library, the app might crash sometimes. I don't know if you're aware of that.
No, that's best reported to us. See if we can reproduce it, and especially send us the mini dump if you can, because that will really help us to know what's going on.
So I'm going to drop here.
Yeah, just give us a support link, and that would be great. No other questions?
Nope.
Like it? No, good. Okie dokie then. Right, so that's this little section on updates. So the next thing I want to do is move into some of the questions we've been added in the last month or so. And some of these are questions we've added before, actually, but they've come up again and again. So I'm going back over them. So first one is, can I scatter geometry with the V-Ray displacement modifier in ForestPack? Obviously this is. So let me just find my file before I switch screens. Okay. And I suspect people have probably tried this. So if I switch screens, let's see if I can stream and render. So, and the reason this has come up recently is because people have tried Chaos Scatter and they have realized that Chaos Scatter, hang on 1 second, can do some of this and think that ForestPack can't, but that's not the case. So this is what they might be trying. So on the right-hand side, we've got Chaos Scatter. Down in the front here, we've got the source object, which has got V-Ray displacement. On the left-hand side, we've got ForestPack. And there's RailClone there too, but let's delete that for now. We don't want to deal with RailClone. Okay. So why is that? Why isn't ForestPack allowing us to scatter displacement? And it's to do with the way that ForestPack works very, very efficiently in that. When ForestPack samples geometry, it isn't just scattering the source object. It actually kind of rebuilds a whole data structure internally. This allows it to be way more efficient, and it also allows for certain aspects of forest color to work, like the ability to tint individual leaves and for our like edge detection to work and stuff like that. So it's a little bit more sophisticated, ForestPack, than just scattering the source geometry, the source object, whatever that might be. However, we can tell it to ignore all that data struct fancy stuff that it's doing behind the scenes and just behave like Chaos Scatter and just scatter the original objects as instances internally. And the way to do that is in the geometry rollout. If you scroll down to the bottom, it seems like a strange choice, but there's an option here that says non-geometric object. One day I'll learn how to draw rectangles. Non-geometric object. Now this is meant originally for lights because we don't want to build a geometry data structure for lights and things like that. So this option was a way of forcing ForestPack to know that you were scattering something that was non-geometric. But if you use it for geometry, it's just going to take this original object, and then when you scatter it, it's going to work with displacement because it's kept the displacement modifier that's on that original geometry. So if you do need to scatter something with displacement on it and it's important to you to do that, then that's the option for you. Be aware that it might be slightly less efficient, slower render times, of course, with any displacement, but it is now, or it's not, it's always been possible. It was just tucked away behind that little checkbox there. Non-geometric object, that's what you want. Hope that makes sense. Okay, So the next question was about how can you selectively scale objects along an edge. This was to do with a particular type of path that someone needed to create, where at certain points along the path they wanted the cobblestones to get gradually smaller, but it was quite isolated. It wasn't kind of all the way around. And so the question was, how can I do that? And this is where ForestPack's flexibility comes in again, because what we have with ForestPack once again is the ability to use forest effects, and so we can do stuff like this. So if you can see on the left hand side here, this is what they wanted to achieve, whereby we've got these cobbles, but you can see just in these areas in the corners they get gradually smaller. So here's how you would do that. So I've got a simple scatter. There's not much to talk about here. It's a simple scatter. The distribution is set to solid to give me a grid. And then I can come into forest effects. Now you don't need to write a forest effect here. This one's built in. So what we do is click to add an effect, come into the effects library. And what we're looking for down in transform is one called scale by spline. And by the way, if you haven't explored this, this is like a whole load of extra features that you might not have played with. There's loads of good stuff in here, and it doesn't involve you writing a single line of code or expressions. So scale by spline. So we'll load that up. And when it loads up, you can see down here we've got some parameters. So first of all, you need to give it a spline that it's going to use, and it's based on the proximity to this spline that it's going to create a scale. So I'm going to select none there. I'm going to pick the spline, and it should be down here somewhere. Is it this one maybe? And then you want to set a fall off distance. So let's say it's 30 centimeters to start with, and nothing's really happening, but that's because we've also got a curve. So it's not a simple, doesn't have to be a simple scale down from 100% to 0%. We actually can control it with this curve. So there you go. If I take that curve down on the right hand side, you can see that effect working really nicely. And I can very quickly control that effect using those. And you know, this curve can be more sophisticated than this, so you can add extra points and do some interesting stuff with it if you wanted to. This is just where ForestPack gets quite powerful with these extra tools that you've got at your disposal. So that was a handy one. Is that a question there, Jaime?
Yeah, there's a question. Well, Asaad is asking about the case he shared on help desk that I see you're on it, regarding displacement V-Ray on RailClone.
Oh, okay. Yes. So in RailClone, let me try this. In RailClone, basically, you have to disable instancing in RailClone. So if I was doing this in RailClone, let me just grab it. It'll take me a while to set this up, so just bear with me if I go through the basics. So if I was to create a RailClone object, and imagining that I'm scattering some geometry or something there, then what you need to do, it should be automatic, but if it's not, then what you need to do is to go into the display rollout and disable the use instancing engine option, which is this one here, use instancing engine, which is this one here. Okay, so just make sure that's turned off. Now in my previous experience, if I added a V-Ray displacement modifier to the top of this, then that would happen automatically. But if that's not happening for you for some reason, then turn it off manually in RailClone. And then you need to assign the displaced material directly to the RailClone object, not on the source geometry. So that's the important thing. The material needs to go directly onto the RailClone object. Okay, and then that should be okay. Of course, you'll want to use, in the V-Ray displacement modifier, use the displaced material from, or displaced map from the material. Okay, but that's basically the way, and that should work. Someone's asking about motion blur in ForestPack 9. Yeah, that's a good question. I think we've covered that somewhere before, but the way that ForestPack works with instancing, you can't procedurally animate something in ForestPack and get motion blur. So I couldn't, for example, in ForestPack, I can't animate what did I say? I couldn't animate, for example, in the transform rollout, I couldn't animate this translation effect and have stuff sliding around animated like this, because actually what's happening is on every frame, ForestPack would be generating it would be rebuilding, basically. It would rebuild every time, and so technically it hasn't moved. It's disappeared and reappeared again on the next frame. That's why that doesn't work. So what you would have to do instead is to take imagine this is your car, take your car, and then you'd have to kind of add an XForm modifier, for example, and then animate the geometry away from its center point. Say, does this work? Yeah. So you see this is moving now, but its pivot is staying in the same place. So this will move in ForestPack, and it will give you a blurred effect, if that makes sense. So you couldn't kind of simulate you couldn't do an animation as such, like a video, where the cars were driving along the splines for long distances. But if you're doing a still where you wanted animation on the cars, this is how I'd do it. Just by adding this XForm modifier, moving it a little bit, just enough to pick up motion blur, so that when you render it, you get the blur on the vehicle. So works for stills. For animation, you need a proper vehicle simulator. It's true, we haven't used AI yet.
Oh, we got out of 30 minutes, right?
Yeah, no, we haven't. No AI in this video, unless I don't actually exist and I'm a kind of AI avatar. Who knows? Okie dokie. So this was one from a while back, actually, which was actually a big studio asked us this, but then it came up again recently, which was how can you create finger paving in ForestPack, and this is a kind of particular type of paving. I love these really specific problems that ForestPack can kind of solve. This is a particular type of paving where the path curves, but the paving stays kind of in line, so it doesn't follow the curve. And to a certain extent, you can do this with spline mode, because you can see here I've got an example of this. And if I come into the distribution role, see I'm in path mode there. And all I've done is to turn off follow path. If I turn them on X, Y, you see they follow the spline, as you'd imagine. But if I turn those off and move this around, this spline, you can see they're doing what I would say is finger paving, which means that they all stay in line, more or less. But there is an issue with this, which is that the steeper this curve gets, because the distance between them is being measured along the length of the spline, not just vertically up through the scene, they start to clash. And the particular style that was being created didn't have gaps between it. So this didn't work really. And this is where you need a little bit of creative thinking to make this work. So let me switch to the real geometry that we used, which is this kind of stuff here. And as you can see, there's no kind of spacing now, because I need these to be butted up one against one another, that quite works, because the steeper the spline or the more angled the spline, the closer together they get. So that doesn't work. So now I'm going to have to be imaginative, and I'm going to use image mode again. Okay, so in image mode, I have got set spacing, right? This black and white distribution map is basically creating a grid, and it's creating a grid based on the units that are here. And in the areas rollout, I can add my spline. So it's kind of working, but kind of not really as well. And this spline's got a kind of thickness, so I've got stuff going everywhere. What I want is for this spline to just pick off one object for each piece. So just one. And so what I want to do is make this really, really small. Let's try 0.001, for example. Now it's going to disappear because my distribution map's too small. So let me come back into here, and I'm going to uncouple the aspect ratio. So then on the x-axis, which is widthways, I want to make this value maybe twice that, or 100 times that, say. So it's like, or 200 times that, actually. Okay, so 0.02, that's 200 times that. Now, why is that? Because this map is 100 by 100 pixels, which means it scatters 10,000 objects, 100 in each direction. And that is why, in order to pick up 1 pixel, I'm timesing the thickness of that spline by 100. And actually that thickness goes on both sides of the spline. So then I'm adding that together to make that twice the value. And then I can control the spacing this direction to get them to butt up against one another like so. And then if there are any overlapping pieces of geometry, we can always turn on collisions as well. They're on already, in fact. We can turn on collisions as well. And this gives you kind of finger paving. You can see which butts up against one another perfectly, even though the curves can be quite steep. And that is a way of doing that. I love these problems that ForestPack was absolutely not designed for, but can do if you just use a little bit of understanding of how it works behind the scenes. So yeah, we should be able to see this is now working. Now this is even tricky to do in RailClone. I mean, it's possible, but it's tricky to do in RailClone because RailClone also measures along the spline. So this is one of the easiest ways I've found to solve this particular type of paving, or path, I should say, rather than paving. I had another question. We did this as a reel quite recently, but I think because reels being reels, they don't go to everyone and people missed it. And I had another question about it quite recently, which is if you're using Chaos Cosmos people now, they come with 4 or 5 different texture variations. So from one model, you can get 4 or 5 different looking people. Is there an easy way to load those into ForestPack so that you can scatter those 5 people without having to load the geometry 5 times separately from the Cosmos browser? So in this scene, for example, I think I've got something like 6 different people here, and they've maybe all got 4 or 5 textures each. And let me open the material browser. And I want a quick way of kind of scattering them with ForestPack. And what I realized was that the Cosmos people, they just changing the texture. And when you download the variation, it downloads all the texture variations and it just puts them in the same folder as the original source. So we wrote a little script, which is on our forum. I'll put the link in the description once this ends. But we wrote this little script and put it on our forum. And basically what it does is it looks at any texture on objects that are inside a ForestPack object. So I need the ForestPack object selected. And what it does is it searches the same folder to see if there are any other textures that have any of these keywords, diff or diffuse. And if it finds them, it wires them to the existing material via a forest color map. So if I click this, you can see down at the bottom here, for example, this top one. If I click this process selected button, then what will happen is, hopefully, there we go. Then what it's done is it's generated a forest color map and it's pulled in the other texture variations there. And it's done that for the 6 different Cosmos people that were in this scene. So that's a good way of quickly getting a little bit more out of your Cosmos people. You'll still see repetition, of course, but it certainly is a lot better than it was when we were just using 6 people without all the color variations. Do we have any more questions, Jaime?
Yes, we have more questions.
Oh, good.
Well, there's a comment from Campus of Chaos saying that it's like the old lectures at the uni when you're looking at the teacher and the professor seems to be saying everything so clear, but once you get home, you just don't understand anything that he was saying.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but
well, I mean, that's why we do this, right? And we keep going over the same things over and over. So great that. And then there's a question from Luis Lab. Is it possible to make irregular facade with different scales, windows, and all fit together?
The good question. Depends what you mean by different size scale. So on the x-axis on a facade, yeah, of course, definitely you can do that. And I've got an example in the RailClone section that maybe will answer some of those questions. If they overlap on the y-axis, like the rows are interrupted by different windows and it crosses rows, that's much harder to do. Not impossible, but I would have to see an example to let you know if that's possible. If it's irregular in a regular way, if you see what I mean, like if there's a pattern to it, then it's probably possible. If it's totally randomized, that's much more of a challenge. And there are workarounds, but that's maybe something for the next, if you've got an example of that for next month, that would be good to see. But maybe the irregular thing I'll show you in a second. Oh, there's an example there. I can't look that up right now, but I will look it up later. Thank you. So in theory, on the x-axis, yes. Overlapping rows on the y-axis, more challenging and might need to be regularized or cheated in some way. It's the y-axis, okay? So it depends if it's random or if it's regular. Okay, so, or not regular, but a pattern or something that's controlled in some way. So I will try and find an example for next month. I see someone is asking, are these monthly? And I would say yes, hopefully. We've always said that we will, and then for various reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I said yes, of course. They are monthly. Okay, so we've been away, 5 months maybe, 6 months?
Yeah, it's been a while.
I always want to remind people that we are a very small company, so we have to do everything between 6, 7 people. And sometimes we just don't have the time to prepare the live streams and put it all together. So, but the intention for 2026 is to go back and do this monthly.
Yeah.
And I would say that if we could even open it to some kind of different format. And last year we brought Roberto, I think, right?
Yeah,
from SOA. So we should bring people in and then even consider doing this as an open discussion with, all mix open and just having a chat with everyone. That could also work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And no AI.
No AI. Right. So we're moving on to, how am I doing for time, Jaime?
Just go ahead. Who cares?
Yeah, okay, it's fine.
No, Mike, we don't have a calendar for this. I mean, we just announced it like a couple of weeks before, and prior to it, and so if you guys follow, I mean, it's interesting to ask you what kind of social media are you following, or you rather use newsletters? I mean, obviously not everyone's opening newsletters nowadays, but we keep sending them out. We usually announce it on socials.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, in the Chaos Campus, yeah. Reminds about such live sessions in the Chaos Campus. Yeah.
I should have done
I think we were doing this before Chaos Campus. But yeah, I have to talk to Ricardo and consider having these talks within Chaos Campus at some time. Yeah.
Cool. So this was a real case we had quite recently, which was someone who was trying to develop this kind of new way of doing their facades for a particular type of building, and it's a really nice little example of a RailClone style that's complicated but not too complicated. But the problem they were hitting here was, like I was saying, they were randomizing on the x-axis objects of different sizes, but occasionally we'd end up with windows sliced at the ends here. So it's not happening everywhere, but in a few places that's becoming a bit of here's another one. They're becoming a bit of an issue. So how can we fix that? And as always with these cases, when we're sent them, it's a case of trying to understand what the user has done, how they're working. And this one's quite interesting, the way they've broken this down, and there's kind of no right or wrong way of doing these things, but we can see with our isolate button what's going on. So if I turn that one on only, we can see that these are just doing these sides, I'm guessing by material ID on the spline. And what am I doing? And this one here is doing the fronts and the corners. And there's another one down there which I think is doing possibly the roof or the floor plates maybe. But the issue is then with this one, right? I think it's this one. The issue is with this one because we've got these different sized pieces at the start and the end, and sometimes, because they're different size pieces, they're slicing a window. And it's a case of how do we solve that? So taking a look at this style, trying to understand it, and this one isn't as bad as some of them I've been sent. I'll show you one later that's really sophisticated. What I realized was that what we're doing here is we're creating a sequence of pieces of blank wall and then a randomized, where's the other bits? Randomized, or not randomized, but sequence of different window sizes. So we've got a wall section that can be sliced. I think that's the one. Oh no, that's the end there. Let's see, where is it? That's the wall section. This is the wall section that can be sliced, and then we've got these windows down here. So what I've done is I've popped, just to make this a bit clearer to see, I've popped a macro in between. And so that I can open this up and we can see how I would change this. So basically all that's happening at the moment is I've connected the graph, the original graph, in to the output so that it's how it was when we received it. And now what we can do is have a look at how we can fix this. So what I've got is a selector node, and I'm going to wire in a sequence to that, the original sequence, and then a blank piece of wall. And what I want to do is basically tell RailClone that if there's not enough space at the end here to add a whole window, where's one that's not working? Somewhere. See, this is the trouble. There's one. If there's not enough space for this window, then just use a blank bit of wall instead. That's pretty much all I'm doing. So I need to measure the distance. And let's just take that. Okay, so yes, so the sequence is in number 1. Okay, so what I've got is a selector modifier with the index exported. That means I can toggle between these two inputs based on some condition. Okay, and the condition is in here. I'm not going to write it out for you, but the condition is in here. And the key thing here is this setting here, which is, oh, I found the rectangle, section adjusted length. Okay, X section adjusted length. And what is that? So the X section adjusted length is the distance from when a segment starts, so here, basically, until the end or the start of the corner or end piece. Okay, now if you normally use an X section length or something, it always measures the whole length of the spline, like all the way along. But the X section adjusted length measures the starting point of the spline, where it sits on the spline, up to the point at which it would be sliced. So this is a really useful dimension to be able to access. And that's what I've got in here. And so what this expression is saying is if this space that's remaining, and that's what basically this means, the remaining space, if that's less than input 1, which is a value I've got down here, it's just to say it's going to be 2 meters, let's say. If it's less than that, then choose the selector input of 2. Otherwise, selector input 1, which is the original sequence. So that's what that's doing. So I would wire that, you can ignore that. I can wire that to the index, and then I can wire this constant node, which is 200 centimeters, to that input. And what we should end up with now, hopefully, is no sliced windows, because any window that appears within 200 centimeters of the end of this balcony will be replaced by a section of wall. And of course, we can change this value. So if we want them pushed back further, you know, we can pull them. That's far too far, but you can do that. Okay, so it's just a quick little way of making sure that if you're using a regularly spaced or irregularly sized objects on the x-axis, you can just make sure they're not sliced at the end. I hope that makes some sort of sense, but that was how we solved that particular case. The RailClone guns tend to be a little bit more technical. So on the subject of slicing, and this one has come up a bunch of times, I feel like I've shared this one before, but I couldn't actually find it in a video or an old live stream. So if I have done this before, I do apologize, but I've definitely done it live somewhere. But this is the scenario, right? This is the suspended ceilings where you might have tiles with lights in them, like this. And this is what you want, right? You want only whole tiles like this. And then around the edges, you want geometry that can be sliced. Yeah. So this is a way of controlling which geometry is displayed around the edges. And it's some of those things that for ages I just thought RailClone couldn't do. And then I realized there's a little bit of a workaround that we can use. So I'm going to share it. And it's a relatively easy setup, actually, for once. So this is our current condition here. We've got a 2D array here with our, like, let's imagine ceiling with lights in there and a clipping area. So at the moment, as you can see, it's being clipped. So first thing we want to do is to come into our lights and go to the deform tab and say, do you know what? We don't ever want this to be sliced. So there's a slice option there at the top there. So we want to make sure that is turned off. And now what happens is nothing is sliced at the perimeter, which is good. We don't want it to be sliced, but we don't want it overlapping the perimeter either. So we want to control that. And RailClone has this option in the generator where I come down here and it says, if you have specified that a segment is not to be sliced, what do you want to do with it when it crosses the perimeter? And what we want to do with it is not to preserve it, but to remove it. Okay, so now we've only ended up with whole pieces inside the perimeter, which solves the problem of them being sliced, but it doesn't fill in between. So what can we do to do that? Well, we'll clone that generator first of all. And here I've got my geometry that I don't mind to be being clipped. Maybe this is just a simple ceiling tile. So we'll just pop that in there. Now, this is obviously going to fill in the whole exact same area, which isn't what I want. So what I want instead is to just have it display along the edge. Now, how do I do that? The one way I could do that is if this outline, instead of being a closed shape like this, was a very thin line, a very thin shape there, then I could try and place geometry inside that. So let's see if we can do that. And this is made possible by the offset spline node, which was added quite recently. So I can just pop that in there. And what this is going to do is let me change the offset of that spline. So I'm going to set something really small, like minus 0.2 centimeters, for example. So I've created a really thin offset. And also what I want to do is to make sure that I retain the original spline. See, that's an option there, retain original spline. Otherwise, I've just moved this existing spline, so I've not created a kind of outline of it. So I'll keep the additional spline. Now, everything's going to disappear because this will also be set to no slice. And if I come into here, you can see for no slice, it's set to remove. So every piece of tile is being sliced, and I've said, if it's sliced, take it away. So what I want to do instead is set it to preserve. Aha. So now what I've got is just these pieces around the outside that fit into that very thin little bit of boundary that I've created, which is fantastic. But of course, now they're not sliced to match my spline. So how do I do that? So what I'm going to do is to take this again, remove that input. And then both of these generators, if I wire these through a compose node to join them together and set this to make grouped, so it groups them by aligning their pivots, and then I wire this to this generator, then I'll be able to put it back and then slice it separately. So which input though? So it works best for me if I use the bottom left input, which is the start bottom input. I'll put that in there. Now, nothing's going to happen because this is a whole piece of geometry. It's set to no slice. And if I come into here and look at my settings for no slice, they're set to remove. I can set them to preserve, but then I haven't gained anything. Or I can say, ignore that no slice, slice it anyway. And there you can see now I've got a setup which, okay, I made it complicated by talking about it a lot, but you can see the graph itself, not particularly complicated. And it will work great for things like windows where I do need some elements to be sliced, but not around the boundaries. You can see as I adjust this, this all updates really nicely, including the ability to have apertures cut out the middle of it. It's also quite just fun to play with. So I hope that makes sense, and it's a useful tip, that one. Have we got any more questions there, Jaime?
Well, Well, first of all, we have an invitation from Theodore Vladov from CE Connect
Ah,
to share the live streams next time. So that's a
that's
great
cool.
one. Thanks for that. By the way, congratulations for the new site.
Mm.
Looks great. To me, from the marketing point of view, it's a great improvement, and I think it's great for the community. And then we have a question. Where do we have question? Mechanic 36 is making this question. Is there a way to do varied with roadways with blinds on both sides of the highway, doing different things and still be able to fill in the pavement in between?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm
That
just
is,
looking for that one. Was that a way back?
that's no, it's
Oh,
up
I got
here.
it. Okay, okay. Varied roadways with I'm not sure what blinds are in this case. Is that like pavements? Um, I mean, possibly. This might be one to carry over. It's obviously varied width. Oh, varied width roadways. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's obviously a challenge. It depends on whether you want the camber and stuff. Obviously, you could. Obviously, with any kind of RailClone object, if you create something that's an irregular width, like this, for example, then you can fill in what's in between by, just bear with me, by kind of creating a big plane, effectively, that's big enough or can tile enough to fill that in. So we can just create
Oh,
that.
he's referring to splines on both sides.
Splines on both sides. Okay. Not currently. Not currently. So yeah, so that would be, yeah, no, that's like we've talked about this internally, and it's quite challenging to do a spline where it connects to both sides, and then fills in between, which I'm assuming is what you mean. What you can do, I don't know if there's any use, but what you can do is this, which I'll just show you. But I suspect this isn't the answer you're after, but nonetheless, it might be interesting for people, which lets you connect two splines together. So just bear with me while I set this up. Okay. So let's open up RailClone. Here's a useful tip for RailClone. If you didn't know it, you can select objects in the viewport, right click and import scene selection. Did I create that spline twice? That's unhelpful of me. Detach. There we go. Okay, so let's just do this in a simple way right now. So obviously if we do this, we draw that along that spline, and if we do this, we draw that along that spline. But we've also got the ability to connect splines together, and this doesn't directly help with this question, but I'm just using it as an excuse to show this. If I do that and then add start and add end, then you can start to connect splines across like so. I don't know why it's not working at the start, but there you go. There it goes. Then as you can connect splines like that, and this works by taking the first spline and putting a connection on every evenly interval. So if I add basic ops in here and add an evenly, then I can connect across like this, and this as you can see is connected. So as I adjust these splines, these things are totally connected. Now this won't help you to fill this in, but it might help you with some other things that are related if you needed to bridge across two splines going like that. So that's kind of just not quite what you're looking for, but as close as we currently have, if you like, to being able to fill between two splines. What we can't currently do is kind of have like an L1S with no gaps at all and bridge it between two splines in a way that's completely seamless. So it's on the kind of to-do list, but we haven't come up with a satisfactory way to do it yet. The thing is, we have to make sure everything works for all the different use cases that there are, or that are likely to exist. So it gives you an idea anyway. This is just maybe you weren't aware this connector thing is here. It's quite handy. Okay. Is there any other? I'm sorry that doesn't quite answer your question, but is there anything else there?
There's another question from Asaad Hamid.
Yeah.
What about RailClone light? When you use the sphere light of mesh, it's okay, but if you use rectangle light, it's annoying to get it on the right pivot.
Okay. Yeah, I can't say I've noticed that.
You guys are making you made 2 tricky questions in a row.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's just understanding what the question is really. So like V-ray light, for example, plane. I'm guessing this is what you mean, like a plane light like this. Yeah, this is probably what you mean. And then if we were to put this into RailClone. Was it RailClone or ForestPack?
RailClone.
RailClone. Then we can add these. I mean, if you put them into default, I mean, they just kind of work. You won't necessarily be able to see it, because it always displays as a bounding box. But what I would say is that in RailClone, if you want it to use the pivot of the object, then you always have to come in and set the alignment here to pivot on all the axes, and then that kind of works. But I think I need to see the specific use case for that to know quite what it is that's not working, unless it's trying to align it to an existing light fitting, in which case that you can see that might be challenging, but that's better off done in ForestPack. Yeah, that's the way to do it. And then of course, if you're actually scattering like a light fitting and a light, then just group them together and then add the group to RailClone, and that should work for you. Should be okay. But maybe drop. I mean, we're in contact on email, I think, Asaad. So like, just drop me a use case there, and I'll have a look at exactly what it is you mean. Okay. Anything else?
I think we were mentioning Abby.
Oh yeah. He's doing some cool stuff. Lovely.
I was thinking about that time. Of course, we cannot name anyone, but we got a picture of this guy who was on vacation and he was slept, like wrapping your RailClone book. The picture was taken by his wife, and she said something like, "Look what you made of my husband."
Yeah,
it wasn't him, by the way. It was just a nice guy.
To be on holiday, yeah. It's nice that we've got these people that
Yeah. Power, the ultimate power user.
Well, so we'll see a style at the end from someone who's sort of doing some interesting things.
24/7 beta tester.
We've gone quite complex. Let's go back to something a little bit more simple. How do we create openable curtains in a simple way? I mean, obviously, this is with TieFlow and stuff. We could do proper curtains with simulations and fabric and so on and so forth. But if you were just filling up a house or a building, you need curtains on every window, and you wanted them to be a little bit randomized, and you're not too fussed about them blowing in the wind, how might you do that? So I was going to show this one because this was a question we got asked recently, and maybe it's better for people who aren't so familiar with RailClone, how quickly you can set these things up. So I've just whipped these curtains out of Cosmos, and all I did was separate it. So I've got the pole here as one object, and I've got the two curtains as another. So if I want this pole to work on multiple windows with different widths, obviously it needs to be scalable in a way that doesn't deform the ends. And I could either cut this into pieces, or I realise I haven't switched screens. Sorry, I know everyone's about to tell me. If you need to, you could either cut this into pieces manually, so you end up with 3 pieces, or if you aren't familiar with this, you've got the RailClone slice modifier, which you can add to the top of any geometry object, and I can basically adjust these planes to slice it kind of internally without having to create multiple objects. So I've got a start and an end, and I'm going to need a default section here too. And with the default section, it's got two planes, one that starts at the beginning and the end. So I've split that, as you can see, into a start, an end, and a default section, like so. And then the curtains themselves, nothing special. They're just separated into two separate objects. So what can we do with that? Let's add a RailClone object. And open the style editor. There we go. And we just want to bring these bits in. So I'm just going to select them all again, import scene selection. Nice and easy. And here's my post. So let's get the post working first of all. So I'm going to take my linear generator in here. This is just a 1D generator. I'm going to wire the spline to the spline input. I'm going to wire, just for now, I'm going to wire the curtains to the default input so we can see it. And I'm just going to change the display mode here to quick mesh so we can see the real geometry. And you can see it's doing what you'd imagine, which is putting the whole geometry in there and tiling it when it's too long. So what I can do is use those segments that I just created with the RailClone Spline modifier in there. And you can do that by adding a transform node in between. And in the transform node, if you scroll down to other, there's a RailClone slice option, and from this you can choose which segment to pick from that RailClone modifier that you added a minute ago. So in this case I want the default, so I'll just pick that, and now you see I've just got a tube. Let's just, did I change the pivots yet? Let's just change the pivots on the Y and Z axis to pivot as well, just to move that up to where it should be. There we go. So now for the start and the end, I can just do the same thing. I'll just duplicate that transform node, wire it to the start input, and then change the RailClone slice here to start. Now you can see I've got my start section, and I'll do the same for the end. So that takes care of that. Okay, start and end. Okay, so that's easy enough. No problems. So let's add the curtains themselves. Here we can take a linear generator, use the same spline here, and then we'll take the curtains. Did I import them already? Yeah, I've already got them. They're here. And let's put those at the start and the end. Now, they're slightly different, I think. So just for fun, let's randomize those. So pop them for a randomize modifier into the start and the end, like so. And let's just make sure that we're using the pivots, not on the X, but on the Y and the Z. And then you can see they're not quite in the right place because the pivot's in the middle of the curtain, and the curtain rail is obviously setting against the wall. So I'm just going to go to the generator and offset that on the Y-axis a little bit. And then the other thing you can see is that obviously they're both going to the very end of the spline. And in the case of the curtains, you want them to stop a little bit short to allow for this bracket and the ball on the end. So if you go into the linear generator, you can come into the limits tab, and there's a padding for the start and the end of the whole generator that you can use. So this is quite a good quick way of just limiting the size of one generator like that. So you're using the same spline for both generators, but very quickly and easily. And you don't have to fiddle around padding on the segments or anything like that. Okay. Excuse me. Good. Okay, so this gives us, as you can see, gives us curtains on either side of the window. Size is adjustable. Can we close and open the curtains? Not at the moment. So what do we want to do there? We probably want to control the size of those. So the quick and lazy way is just to scale these. Of course, again, this isn't a fluid sim. I'm not going to be able to get these wrinkles to unfurl like this. This is the quick and dirty version of it. But if we export the parameters and go to fixed size X, we can control the size of that curtain. Now, if I just set a dimension there, then it might not be enough on the wider windows, and it might be too much on the narrow one. So we want to use an attribute of that spline length if we can here. And so what we're going to do is take the arithmetic node and type, go to expression, click edit expression, you can see we added this recently. It's got a return on a semicolon. So this tells you where you've got to add your expression. And in this case, I don't need to remember this. I can just look on the list on the left-hand side and think what looks like most likely to be the length of this spline. And it is, in fact, something called XSpline length. So I'll just double click to add that. Haven't even had to type it. And hit evaluate. And OK, it says it can't be evaluated, but that is because I haven't connected it yet. So let's connect it up. Turn on override fixed size in the transform node. And now what's happened is, of course, each curtain is the full width of the spline, full length of the spline, because I set that like that. So what I need to do is to come back into my expression and divide that value by 2, half the length of the spline. Hit evaluate. Now they're half the length of the spline when they're closed. When they're closed. Do I want them to be closed all the time? Not really. I'd like to randomize it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wrap that in brackets because we already know that value's fine. And then I'm going to type multiplied by input 1. What's input 1? Well, it actually doesn't exist yet, input 1. Input 1 is whatever I connect to this input here. And what I'm going to do here to connect to it is a random number node. So I'll just connect a random number node to that. Change it to float. We don't want it 100. Let's set it to 1. And now what I'm doing is I'm picking a random number between 0 and 1. I probably don't want 0 either, actually. It's 0.2 maybe. And it's randomly picking a number between 0 and 1 and multiplying the width by that. Now, it's only doing that at the start. So you can see all the curtains have exactly the same random value applied. But if I change this to XSpline start, then each window gets a random open or closed value. And that's going to work whether you've got one window or hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of windows. And they're all going to get random values. So that can save you a bunch of time if you've got a whole building to populate with curtains. So that was a question we got asked. Hopefully that solves. And I think we're getting towards the end now. So I'm going to see if there's any questions. And otherwise, I've got one last case that was specifically sent to me by a user for this particular live stream.
No questions.
No questions?
Okay. We were requested if we have a public roadmap, which is, I mean, that's something that, I mean, we cannot have that because of limited resources. But we are doing some investigations with Forest Ivy. That's a way in which ForestPack will be expanded for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then some RD with scanning and expanding the libraries that come with Forest Ivy and other assets. We are going to have, I think we're going to be able to unveil big news regarding assets during Q2. I mean, before summer. Besides that, there's not much we can tell right now.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think ForestPack, like they're saying that what's ForestPack's the ultimate scattering tool. I think that's it. It's the ultimate scattering tool. So we're making it the ultimate landscaping suite, right? So it's Forest Ivy. It's the various plugins that come with it. It's a whole toolbox of things, but we haven't got a specific.
But this brings to my mind something that happened when we did release a new version of our ForestPack Lite tutorial, the basic tutorial of the free version of ForestPack. And it was amazing because despite the fact that we were explaining basic features, there were a lot of people saying, hey, this is so cool that this is something that you never explained. And it's like, hey, that feature has been there for 25 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess there's being such a huge plugin, there's so many things that are hidden there and here and there that people don't know yet, that my perception is that we have to go over and over the same stuff, so we can spread the word.
Yeah, I
Something
think
that we love doing, by the way.
yeah, I do. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, in a sense, that's what we've just done with some of these little tips and tricks weren't the obvious things in ForestPack. We've gone beyond like, oh, you add an area and you scatter it and you change the distribution map. And it's sort of a bit like, by the way, there's these 200 other features hidden away here and there that you might have missed. ForestPack's been around for what was it, 25 years now?
26 years.
26 years. Like,
I mean, from 1999.
Yeah.
So
There's a lot in it. There's a lot in it. There's of course all the stuff you need for basic scattering, but there's loads of other stuff that's based on all of the questions you send us and the queries and the things you've told us you need. So keep that coming. Like, let us know what you need. That's always really, really helpful for helping us to develop the software.
and then Paul, there's another thing on top of that, which is and we've been talking to some of our schools and how people training, people teaching content right now, they're struggling with the way in which this new generation of people perceives that content, and how difficult it is to keep people's attention for more than 5 minutes nowadays, because guys, I mean, the kids are used to classic, doom scrolling and that kind of stuff. So some schools that we work with, they've told us that their main challenge right now is to keep people's attention for more than 5 minutes, which is sad, by the way. But so I guess we are facing a new way to explain what we thought was basic or could be explained in a basic way. And I think that's a big challenge for us and for CG Connect and for everyone creating content out there.
I mean, yeah, it's an interesting point. I think it definitely used to be. I mean, we've been doing this a long time, right? And it's definitely changed. So it used to be people really got into like knowing what all the nuts and bolts each individual setting did, really feeling like a deep understanding of what they were doing was important, but understandably in a commercial environment, like, it's just outcome focused. You've got to be able to get to do the thing you do with the most control in the least possible time, and that's what we've got to demonstrate now, really, I think. Anyway, we're talking to each other instead of
Yes, a couple of questions, by the way. Coffeeholic. Yeah, there's a new minor version of RailClone coming out. There will be some assets coming out with it. Okay. That should happen in less than a month. Okay.
It's more interiors focused though, isn't it? So it's not roads and sidewalks, but interiors for now.
True.
We've got
but we do have a roadmap. We do have a roadmap to work on the include libraries in both plugins and mainly for RailClone. So we have a guy right now doing that specifically. And there's a question from Mike. Sorry if this was already covered, but if there's a V-Ray displacement at terrain ForestPack, we respect the height.
Okay, that's an interesting question, and there's I'll include it in the description when we compile the description at the end of this. But there's a couple of tutorials for this because no scatterer respects the height of displacement currently if it's generated at render time. Because that geometry doesn't exist except in the render time. So you can't place objects on top of it. And so one of the workarounds when we first introduced Forest Effects, one of the first Forest Effects that we added was one that could read the displacement map and read the V-Ray displacement modifier's distance and use those things to offset the scattered objects based on where the displacement is going to be when it's rendered. And that's been pretty successful so far. I mean, it's where it doesn't work is if you're trying to follow the contours of it, because it's just you can't read that. But in terms of making sure your stuff's not lost inside a displacement, that works quite well. And there are a few tutorials for that. And there's an effect built into the Forest Effects library, so you don't need to write it or learn it. That will take care of that for you. So I will post that. Or Jaime, maybe post it in chat if you can find it. But I'll add it to the description. But we have covered it. In tutorials in the past. There's a couple out there, but it should work with Krona as well. There's a Krona version. So in answer to your question, yes, but I'll just share a video rather than demonstrate it. So are there any other questions, Jaime? Sorry, was that the last one?
Nope. So you can go ahead.
Let's go ahead. Okay, so the very last thing I just wanted to share it because it's really nice when someone sends us what they're doing with our software. And this was by Asaad Hamid. This is a generator he is creating for creating walls on building facades with loads and loads of settings and control. And it shows how far some of our users are willing to push ForestPack in terms of the complexity of the graphs they're happy to do. So I'll just start a little video running here. I've sped it up a couple of 100%, but it's just a quick demo of it, and I'll talk about this in a second, because Asaad also had a couple of questions that he wanted to ask me about this. So I'll deal with those too. But what you can see here is him creating, using this generator, different layers of a building, but he's using RailClone Markers here to place windows. And the RailClone Markers themselves have data in them so that he can control the type of window that's being used, the different dimensions of the window, and various other things. It's a very quick way of creating these different layers. He's also got some settings in here that allow him to control the material IDs of the buildings, the walls themselves, so he can change the materials, and he's got a question about that, which I'll come to. And all told, I was just really interested to see how he's using RailClone to create these kinds of assets for himself. It seems like a very powerful sort of whole building tool to me that is being used to speed up his particular workflows. So thank you very much, Asaad, for sending this in, and I will try and deal with your questions in just 1 second. And also, I think Asaad is on the chat, so you can ask him questions if you like on the chat, if that's okay. So one of the questions was about material IDs. So what's happening here is that, as best I could tell, because I'll show you the graph in a minute, and it takes me a while sometimes to understand some of these graphs, but as best I can tell, the intention is to change the material ID on the spline and let that choose the material that's being used by those walls. So let me switch to the main capture. And first of all, show you the graph. So first of all, you can see we've got tons of parameters down here, but the ones that I'm particularly interested in, these material IDs, and these material IDs seem to be linked to what's on here. So if I open this graph up, and you can always tell how complicated someone's gone by how long that graph takes to open. It's a busy one, first of all, but nicely organized. It's got some groups in here, some note groups to try and tidy things up a little bit. And what I was looking for in here, because the first question was how do I control these material IDs, is what's going on with the material IDs. And I can see some evidence of it here. And it looks like what's being done here is we've got these material ID operators here, which are changing the material IDs of material ID 1, and then here we've got a selector node which is set to pick one of these based on the material ID assigned to the spline. So the material ID assigned to the spline is choosing the material that's being rendered on the walls. That's my best understanding of what's happening here. The first thing I would suggest is that you've put this material ID quite far back in the graph, which means if you've got multiple nodes, you're going to have to maybe duplicate it many times. Now in this case, I think maybe it is only here, but if I had lots and lots of bits of geometry that I wanted to control with material IDs, I'd be looking right to the end of the graph here, and I can see that all of this terminates in this master linear generator here. And so I might be tempted to pop my material nodes here instead to save having to do it lots of times over there. So that's the first thing. But I'm not going to modify this graph because we're never going to understand quite what this simple demo is going to do like that. So I'm going to just do a simplified version of it. And what I've got here is a similar setup. So I've got a piece of geometry, I've got 3 materials on there, and I've got a spline that's split up. So if I wanted to modify these material IDs using the spline, I would just do something as simple as the following. So I would add my material node here, and you can see I'm replacing material ID with, in this case, a random ID from 1 to 3. We don't actually want to randomize it, but that's what you could do, or you could sequence it. But in this case, we want to choose it with the graph. So how would I do that? What I'd do is export the from and the to parameters. And then in here, I'm going to wire an arithmetic node. You can tell I like arithmetic nodes, but they save a bunch of time. And open the expression where it says 0, replace that and what am I looking for? I'm looking for the material ID assigned to the X-spline. So if I come down, try and find something that sounds like that, X-spline material ID. If I double click on that and hit evaluate, then basically what I've done is, I can close this now, is I'm now controlling the material ID of the geometry by changing the material ID on the spline. And that to me seems like the easiest way to do things. If I can find it, here it is. Just in a couple of nodes. So you can easily go through and update that if you like. Okay, so that was the first question. The other question Asaad asked, as far as I recall, was just how to sort of tidy up this graph, how to hide the wires and so forth. So let me just open this graph up again. So Asaad saying it will change the Windows material also. Well, it'll only change, Asaad, it'll only change the material ID of the ID that's targeted in that material ID node. So just give the Windows a different material ID that isn't material ID 1, and then it won't change that. It only changes the targeted material ID. But if the Windows on a different material, then that will solve that problem for you. So this graph, it's already quite well organized, I would say, and like a certain number of sort of wires is kind of inevitable when you're getting to this kind of complexity. But there are a couple of things that I think you could have used that you haven't to tidy this up. So for example, taking this little example down here, this is a whole section here which has two outputs. And it looks like a numeric output, but it's not connected to anything. So if I was to try and tidy this up, what I might do is use macros. Okay, so what we can do is we can select this, copy it, add a macro, double click on it, and then paste that into there. Now, generally speaking, I find it easier to build macros as I go rather than convert them afterwards. But in this case, it seems to be working okay. So this gives me my macros, but if I come back to my basic level, you can see I haven't got my outputs there. So I do need to add those manually. And what I need to do is just add output nodes where I want an output to be. And since I can't remember exactly which version of RailClone it was, but we have added the ability now to have multiple outputs from a macro, which makes them so much more useful for this sort of thing. And I know you're not using it, but let's say I wanted a numeric output as well. I can do that even as well and mix different outputs from this macro node. So here you can see now I've got this whole section, apart from the segments, which you'd need to wire back in, is condensed into this macro. And I've got my two outputs plus this Z size if you wanted it. And you should probably name them that I could replace that section with. And there's probably various other bits here that you could replace with macros in that way to save a bit of time. I see you've got some macros in here already, but that will definitely clean up the graph. And the other thing is about the wires. So one of the questions is how can you maybe hide some of the wires? There's two ways. So if you weren't aware of it, you can use the view hide wires option up here. This is just a toggle and there's a shortcut for it, which is Control and W. So you can just hide all the wires and then you only see the wires of the objects or the nodes you're interested in clicking. So you can just see how things connect like that. Now, maybe that's not for you. Or you can selectively kind of change the display of wires. So this perhaps is an example here. Maybe this guy roams off down here. Maybe we want to hide that until we need it. So what we can do is add these things called link nodes. So I can add this here. I think we did a short about this recently. And what in fact I might do here is to connect that to the whole load of outputs there. I tend to like, it's up to you, but I tend to like the first one to be a full node so that I can see it more easily. And then the other ones further along the chain to be the simplified versions. So we can take this down here, for example, and maybe we can add one here. I'm not going to do the whole graph, obviously. Pop that there. Now, what you can do now is between this node and these other link nodes is I can change the display to either dashed, which shows me dashed lines, or I can hide them. And then when I click off of them, they're gone. Okay, so you can clean up the graph a little bit more selectively in that way. And you can also, if you had multiples of these, you can change the link style of multiple nodes at once. So you don't need to do it one at a time. So I guess for cleaning up the graph, those would be my tips for you. Make extensive use of macros. For me, they're the biggest win. And where there's still too much complexity in the wires, start using link nodes to hide and tidy up things. You can also reroute things by double clicking on them. So you can add little bits and bobs to maybe make the wires not overlap one another and that kind of thing. But that's, yeah, for the graph like this, you might want to spend a bit of time. But that, I mean, I would say on the whole, it's not too bad. I get a lot worse ones without these nice notes. You've annotated it well. So it was not trouble at all to try and understand what was going on here. Well done. And the other question, as I recall, was how to add this to the library afterwards. And maybe there's a more complex question here, but in case you weren't aware, RailClone shares the same benefits as ForestPack in being able to add stuff to the library just from the scene. So you can pretty much open, it's a bit of a preview. You can pretty much open any library. Let me just try and create a new library. Create a new library here, rename it. Build. And then if we want to add this from the scene to the library, just like in ForestPack, you can right click and import RailClone objects from scene. Just like before, you can choose to use 3ds Max format or the new portable format, which will make it compatible with older versions of 3ds Max. If you need to generate a material library because you're going to support other material libraries, like for different renderers, then you can leave that ticked on, otherwise turn it off. And you can set a thumbnail size. Now you might want to render your own thumbnails later, but this will create you some quick previews. And you just hit import. And then you've got that in the library every time you want to use that style. It's just taking a second to create that. Taking more than a second. Not sure why. Anyway, I hope that answers your 2 questions. There was a 4th question, which was about RailClone's ability, just while this is doing whatever it's doing, RailClone's ability to, there it is, RailClone's ability to maybe create windows with curved tops. And that is going to be probably more problematic because RailClone's arrays are kind of 2D square based. And you would probably be able to do it if you had splines that were curved with a little bit of fiddling around and cheating and stuff like that, but you can't really generate those splines with a curved top and a square bottom in RailClone directly. So that would probably be a problem, and I would say not yet, basically, to that one. That's why I'm not showing it. I can't see an easy way of making a parametric curved top window or door at present, unless it was a fixed size curve, in which case you could obviously just import it. Other than that, yeah, here we go. This is now in the library, and anytime you want to use this to create a building, you can easily just load it into a new RailClone style and it's ready to go. And I would suggest if you're not every time you're creating a useful RailClone style, saving it to the library for reuse, you're missing a trick, because it saves a ton of time if you remember you've got them in there. Otherwise, who can remember what you called that file and where it was saved? I mean, maybe you're more organized than I am, but I never know where things are. So that's a handy tip if you've not yet explored that. But I think most people know you can do that now, hopefully you do. Apart from that, I think we have come to the end of the stuff that I planned. So unless there are more questions, then I think we can wrap it up.
I would say so. It's been an hour and a half, so
there you go. Perfect.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent. Cool.
So last chance, guys. Also, if you've got any questions that you'd like me to get into for the next month. So the idea they'll probably be just like this one, just at the beginning of March for February, if you know what I mean. So we can cover the stuff that was discussed in February just at the beginning of March. I imagine that's the pattern we're going to follow.
Yep.
Okay.
Cool.
And
thanks everyone for showing up. Yeah, I mean, it's great
everyone.
to see that after this little absence, we still have capacity to bring people together. So, by the way, let me suggest an evening reading. It's a minute. And nothing else, right, Paul?
No, I thought you were going to say something. Sorry.
No.
No, okay, yeah, no, nothing from my side. Just stay tuned with the new RailClone and ForestPack release, hopefully next few weeks.
Yeah.
With the bits and pieces I showed you at the beginning. So it's a minor release, but some useful stuff in there, so keep an eye on it. And we'll include some libraries as well that we haven't shown.
Yep.
Other than that, see you next month, and let us know between now and then if you'd like us to tackle anything.
Cool.
Thank you.
Bye.